Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time out for the webinar today. My name is James Mallory at E2B Technologies, and today we're really excited. We're going to be talking about Anytime Supply Chain, which is a cloud-based, web-deployed solution that has long been needed in the market to help companies with their supply chain management. So the bulk of the presentation today is going to be a demonstration of the software. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start out. Just a summary of what we have today with Anytime Supply Chain, and we'll talk a little bit about the future product direction. As I mentioned, Anytime Supply Chain, the reason that we're developing, we've developed what we have today and why we're continuing to develop this solution is there are a lot of companies out there that are distributors, manufacturers, ranging from small businesses running QuickBooks on up to companies running cloud-based solutions like Intact, and other companies running some more traditional mid-market ERP systems like Sage 100, for example, or some of the Microsoft Dynamics solutions, where they don't have a lot of functionality available to them to help them with their material planning. And that's really in respect to a couple different areas. The first is in respect to forecasting demand. Even if I'm a very small distributor or a manufacturer, in a lot of cases, I need to know or predict or try to predict what is my demand, especially if I'm sourcing product from overseas. I have products with very long lead times on the manufacturing side of the equation. So what we're bringing to the table with Anytime Supply Chain, the first component of it is sales forecasting. So the typical way that people would forecast, they're going to look at last year's sales. They're going to maybe mark them up, mark them down as far as units that they're projecting that they're going to need. They're going to go to their sales team. They're going to get input from the sales team on what they think they can sell. They're going to look at introductions if they're introducing a new product line, for example, and try to derive some sort of a forecast maybe off of a similar product line or what have you. And typically the tool that is used, even in the larger organizations that we've worked with historically, has been Microsoft Excel, because you can do so many different calculations and permutations of your forecasts in Excel. So we're going to talk a little bit about forecasting. We're getting into the product, but we can bring in a forecast that you've developed. We can then integrate that with your MRP. And when I say MRP, I also am talking about DRP, and we'll talk about the differences there in a minute. But we'll basically integrate that forecast so that if you're a distributor, you'll understand when your demand or planned demand is going to hit, what purchase orders that you need to plan for your vendors. If you happen to be in more of a distribution center environment, you can also manage planned transfer orders from one warehouse or replenishing warehouse to one of your distribution centers. In addition, if you are a manufacturer, we're going to be looking at driving that forecast for the finished goods that you produce, drive down through the bill of materials to find out what items within the bill of material you need to manufacture, all the way down to the component level raw materials that would be purchased items, so that you can get a better understanding of, here's my forecast, here's the items I need to make and when I need to make them to meet that demand, and then underneath that, again, drilling down through what are the components I need to buy, who am I buying from, and when am I placing that order, okay? On the DRP side, it's distribution requirements planning. We're looking at all kinds of things there, right? We're looking at your inventory levels for your different items, your stocking levels, safety stock. We're looking at, again, if you have a multi-warehouse environment, if you're replenishing from one to another. We're also time phasing all of this. So what I mean by time phasing is, let's say that it takes me 30 days to acquire material from my vendor, and I've got an order that's sitting out there 2 months away. Well, I don't need to cut that purchase order today. I can wait for another 30 days, before I release that purchase order to my vendor because I have a 30-day lead time. Okay, so we're actually time phasing this. It's going to save companies a lot of money in carrying costs for their inventory and go toward more of a just-in-time purchasing scenario. Okay, I did mention the transfer orders as well. And we're also driven off the inventory parameters. The way the anytime supply chain is architected is that it's deployed via the cloud on Microsoft SQL Azure. So it's a web-based application. And what we're doing is we're pulling in information from your ERP or your accounting system, whether that be QuickBooks, Intact, or what have you. Some of those systems have parameters that drive your DRP or your MRP planning. For example, I may set up safety stock levels. I may set up min-max or EOQ type definitions in my ERP system. So we're actually reading that information from your accounting system or your ERP application into anytime supply chain. We're then obviously pulling in forecasts and then netting out the results of that. So if I've got a forecast for 1,000 units in this period, and I've got actual sales orders for 800 units, I'm still going to plan to make 1,000 units because it's the greater. But if I have sales orders for 1,200 units, then I'm fully consumed that forecast, and my DRP or my MRP should be telling me to either make or buy, depending on the nature of that item, 1,200 units because I've actually fully consumed the forecast that I had anticipated. Okay. In situations where you're on an accounting application or an ERP application that does not have all the information that would be required to drive a DRP or an MRP plan, you are able within any time supply chain to be able to maintain those parameters. So if you want to set safety stock levels, min, max, EOQ, all of that information, you can do that within any time supply chain. Okay. MRP is pretty much the same thing as your DRP, only for manufacturing. It's really the only big difference. If you look at a manufacturing environment, you've got planned purchase orders, you have planned transfer orders in many cases. The big difference is that if I'm manufacturing something, I have a bill of material and I have a lead time on the production process. So what we're doing is if you're on an accounting or ERP system that has a bill of material, we're going to be pulling that in and then driving down through the router or the labor operations to determine the manufacturing lead time. Okay, and then also looking at the longest lead time for the component item. An example of this. So let's say I'm making a shovel, and I can get the handles, in a couple days. That's not a big deal. But let's say that I'm manufacturing the blade, and the blade takes me a week to manufacture. Probably not, but for this example, let's say it takes a week. But let's say the steel takes a month for us to procure from our vendor. What we really want to do is look at the full picture of the material requirements planning and say, all right, well, based on what I have in inventory for my raw materials, can I make this quantity now? Do I need to push out this work order? Do I need to move in a purchase order to be able to meet my customers' demands as well as maybe my safety stock demands because I might want to build to stock anticipating a busy season. So all of this stuff is typically done in a small organization in Microsoft Excel. Again, because there really has not been a solution like Anytime Supply Chain available to the what I call the SMB market or the smaller mid-sized businesses. Okay. So with that said, let's stop talking and start showing. And what I want to do here is walk through Anytime Supply Chain, and we're going to actually look over at the forecast first because it all kind of starts with a forecast. This solution is ideal if you're in really a make-to-stock type of environment, repetitive manufacturing. If you're more of a job shop, then probably not as much of a need for sales forecasting because a lot of one-offs and it's tough to predict the demand. If you're a distributor, typically distributors can forecast because they can look at what they've sold historically, maybe take into consideration promotions, new product lines that they're picking up, new accounts that they're selling into. and get a pretty good idea of what their demand is going to be. Okay, so let's walk through the forecasting. Everything here is driven off a forecast group. And a forecast group is basically a group of items that are forecasted in the same way. And what I mean by that is we may have items that we want to forecast monthly for demand because we're ordering monthly, or there isn't a lot of variability within that month for the product demand. There may be other items that we want to forecast maybe daily. We run into this in industries such as automotive, where they're getting actually EDI forecasts from the automotive tier 1 or tier 2 companies, telling them what to expect that they need to buy or make to supply them as a customer. So we've seen it really granular down to the daily level. We've also seen it up to monthly, quarterly, or if you really have no variability in your demand over a year, you could forecast annually. Okay. We do forecast by warehouse, so if you have multiple warehouses, you can maintain multiple forecasts there. The forecasting period here is monthly. Again, we can change that if we want to go daily, quarterly, weekly, or yearly. The smoothing period is important because even though I'm forecasting in this example monthly, if I'm doing my material planning weekly, meaning I'm cutting purchase orders weekly, I'm releasing work orders to production weekly, what I want to do is I basically want to smooth that demand down. So if I have 100 units I'm forecasting and I've got 4 weeks in a month, I want to see 25 units per week that I either need to make or buy. Okay. The smoothing method becomes important primarily if you're making or selling very expensive items, such as capital equipment, where you may only make 12 pieces of equipment a year, maybe 20 or 30. And what this does is it allows me to enter, let's say, a forecast annually for 13 units of a piece of capital equipment. But I'm then going to smooth that down monthly for my planning. Well, there's 12 months in a year. I forecasted 13. What do I do with that extra machine? The smoothing allows me to say, true smoothing front, I'm going to take that unit and spread it across from the front of the forecast to the back. So if I had 2 extra units left after I gave 1 to each month, I would have 1 in January, 1 in February, or whenever I set up my forecasting periods. I can also do front heavy, meaning I just dump the leftover demand in the first period, and in this example would be January. Rear heavy says I dump them on the last period of my planning forecast, and true smoothing back means that I'm going to smooth it from the back forward. So if I had 2 units left, I'd put 1 in December, 1 extra one in December, and 1 extra one in November. Okay. Roll forward is important in a lot of industries. And I'll give you an example of what this means. So let's say that I'm forecasting 1,000 units of an item in January, and I only get 800 units sold in January. If I'm planning monthly, I can choose to roll forward the 200 units that I had forecasted that weren't consumed by actual orders into February's forecast. In a lot of industries, you have a pretty good idea of where the demand is going to hit. You just don't know exactly what month that order is actually going to come in and consume that forecast. So you can roll it forward in this example. If I rolled it forward 1 week, if I hit the next week, I'm going to see the unconsumed demand there. If I go forward to the next week, and I'm only rolling forward 1 period, that demand would actually drop off, and I would only look at what I had forecasted for that period. Kind of a different concept to think of, but it's very flexible, especially in those industries where you really don't know when you're going to get the orders in. Okay. If I look down here at the bottom, I can see the different items that are part of this forecast. We do have ways to add items in. You can select multiples. And then from here, you can do a couple different things. One is you can maintain the forecast versions. So maybe I want to have a version that I use for my actual planning. Maybe I want another one that is more of a best case scenario. If I'm a distributor, maybe I'm looking to get my product into a big box retail store, or maybe I'm looking to land a major account. So I can put that in and determine how would, an increase affect my distribution planning, my purchase planning. Or, hey, I've got a customer that is struggling really financially. They're going through Chapter 11, and it looks like I could lose them. That's kind of a worst-case scenario, right? How would that affect my material planning? Do I have enough stock or too much stock that maybe I need to liquidate because there's not going to be any demand there? Okay. We can also consolidate warehouses from a planning standpoint or a forecasting standpoint. So I might have some virtual warehouses that are part of a distribution center or a manufacturing shop floor. So I can consolidate them together and look at my plan for that consolidated location as opposed to down to the virtual levels. Okay, so there's my forecast versions. The other thing that I can do here is I can actually go in, and this would be the tool where you would import the forecast. The first thing you would do is set up your forecast product group, identify the items that are part of that. Again, that's being synchronized over from your accounting system or your ERP system, so you don't have to maintain inventory in two places. We can then click the export button. What that's going to do is export and create a Microsoft Excel template for us that has all the columns and fields that we need you to fill out to determine what the forecast will be. Okay. Once you get that forecast template exported, you can then go ahead, enter the information in. You could also use some third-party tools such as Forecast Pro if you wanted to do some statistical modeling on your information. As long as you can get that out, copy and paste that forecast into our template, import it back in through here, and then once you've got the forecast imported, you would go ahead and click the Generate Demand. Now this is an important point here. When we generate demand, what we're basically doing is taking all your forecast information and putting it into a format where a DRP or MRP system like Anytime Supply Chain can work with it. Excuse me. And what I mean by that is MRP and DRP systems don't care about customer-specific demand. We do allow you to forecast down to the item and warehouse level, as well as if you wanted to down to the customer level, sales rep level, or territory level. And what I can do then is I can forecast for my top 10 customers, and then I might have another 1,000 customers that represent maybe 10 or 20% of my business. I can group them all together. When I import that data in here, Generate Demand is going to consolidate everything, my customer-specific demand and kind of this all others, and give me a plan by item, by warehouse, by MRP planning period, okay? Because that's really what we care about when we're looking at purchasing and manufacturing. Okay. There's one other point there. Maybe I'll remember and we'll come back to it. But so we've got our demand generated. Oh, the other thing too is the smoothing. So in this case, if I'm forecasting monthly, that spreadsheet is going to have 12 months for all the items in the forecast. I would go ahead and enter a forecast in for those months for each of those items, and I would enter it back into the system. When I click the Generate Demand button, what that's going to do then is to smooth that down into the weekly periods that I would be using for my material planning. So that's another important element. You don't have to forecast in the same period size that you're using for your purchase planning, your transfer order planning, and your manufacturing planning. Okay, so that's a little bit on forecasting. And then once you got your forecast, you're going to come over to our planning workbench. And this is where you're going to have the system look at your forecast, your open orders, whether they're sales orders or purchase orders or work orders. Look at all of your inventory parameters, safety stock levels, etc., min-max, EOQs. And we're going to look at all that information. We're going to see what your supply position is in each of the planning periods. Okay. The way that we've architected this is that it's really driven off of the concept of exception messages. And so I'm going to get planned orders or action messages for me if I don't have enough stock or I don't have planned work orders, purchase orders, et cetera, in the system to meet that demand, whether it's hard demand from sales order or forecasted demand from the forecasting application. Okay. So what I've got here over here on the left is I've selected this first release plan purchase order, which is an action message the system has created for me. And it's saying that I've got some really bad demo data here, folks. I've got 1,139 days negative to act, which means that I should have released that planned purchase order, I'm not very good at math, 3 years ago. So not exactly great data, but I think you can follow me here. That what my goal would be is to have those all, number one, be in the positive. So if I have 3 days, 10 days, 30 days to react to that demand, I'm going to keep those in a queue, look at them, I can group things together, and then decide what do I need to buy, what quantities, and from who. Okay. So we've got a lot of information here. You can assign different priorities to the different action messages. You can even create your own action messages. And I can mark this one as a follow-up. That way I can leave it in my plan and look at it later. I can complete it, meaning that I've actually released this planned purchase order and created it in my accounting system. So I don't need to worry about that anymore. And then anytime supply chain is going to say, all right, well, you have a planned purchase order. We know based on your vendor lead times that you should receive that quantity of material on this particular date. So take that into account on the supply side of the equation. Okay. We'll scroll over a little more, show you some more information here at the top. So we can see the vendor ID, the buyer ID, the planner ID. You see the stocking unit of measure. You see the message itself. All kinds of stuff. Purchase product line, the lead time, the suggested date for that order, etc. Okay. Now, when I selected this item, I can also see a period summary here at the bottom. And again, I'm planning weekly. So you can see I've got 1/1/2010, 1/8/2010, 1/15/2010 here at the bottom. So that gives me kind of a breakdown of my supply and demand over those different planning periods. And I can determine from my MRP planning or DRP planning workbench what's the period size I want to look at. Do I want to look out over the next 30 days, the next 60 days, the next 90 days, etc. So I can see, what do I have on purchase order for this item? What do I have on transfer order from another warehouse? What do I have on work order? That's an actual work order out in my system for manufactured items. What do I have on plans for planned purchase orders within MRP or DRP? Planned transfer orders. I've also got my forecast in here. My sales order requirements are coming in. Transfer order requirements from other warehouses. Work order requirements is if this happens to be an item that is required in an upper level assembly or finished good. Planned transfer orders. I've got all this information. I've got my balance on hand. I've got my balance adjusted on hand here. And what that means is that that's adjusting for my safety stock levels. So if I have 10 units on hand, but my safety stock levels for that particular item in warehouse are set at 10, the system looks at it and says, well, your adjusted level is really 0 because you always want to have those 10 units in your warehouse. Okay. And that's going to tell you what you have on total and what your total requirements are by period. Okay. Netting out the planned orders that the system is telling you need to release. I can also drill down if I wanted to look at actual transaction details. Transaction view for the item that I've selected here. So I can see a lot of different information here. I can see the quantities, the different order numbers, whether the sales orders, forecasts, etc. by period, and then have that netted out. For each of the items, I can also come over here. Let me just scroll over so you can see the transaction detail. This is the planned release transfer order, and you can see that it is not firm. It has not been released. Again, I'm working with some demo data here. This would not be a vendor because it's a transfer order, but if this was a planned purchase order, I would see the default vendor for that purchase product line, or I could change that vendor to whoever I want to source that product from. From a buyer standpoint, some ERP systems allow you to define a buyer for an item, for a group of items, typically by a purchase product line as well. If you don't have that capability in your accounting system, you can define the buyers within Anytime supply chain. Okay. For this particular transaction that I'm looking at as the planner, I can see the order date, or the planned order date, and the required date. You can see that they're the same date, so I really have no lead time on this transfer. Maybe I'm transferring from a on-site stocking location that is set up as a warehouse to a virtual warehouse, maybe on my shop floor or stage for picking. Okay. And then I can see the quantity of the order and the suggested quantity. You can override this. So in a lot of cases, you know, maybe suggesting 6,392 if this is a planned purchase order. You might want to adjust that and just say, you know what, we might as well go ahead and transfer or purchase 6,400 units. Round number, we have some excess inventory, but you always have the ability to override this quantity before you update the system. Okay. And then if I look down here at the bottom for this particular item that's related to this action message, I've got some other information on the screen. I've got the item ID, the warehouse, the item type, item class, the order classification, stocking unit of measure, purchasing unit of measure, sales unit of measure. Does it make the order item? Is it tied to a blanket purchase order if it's an item that I'm buying? If so, what is the blanket purchase order number? What's the purchase product line? What's the source bill of material, the vendor, the source warehouse? I mean, all this information. Again, don't worry about this. If you don't have this information in your accounting system, you can maintain it within our application. And these are all the parameters that we really care about when it comes to determining what to buy, what to make, when, and from who, or in what facility. Okay. There are some pretty cool things in here, such as the aggregate purchase order. And what that allows us to do is when DRP or MRP is running, you know, I'm going to get planned purchase orders for certain items, and I can actually aggregate or consolidate them into one purchase order to my vendor. Okay. And a couple other things, just some notes on this screen. I can rearrange this however I want. I can use it, we kind of designed it in a split screen fashion. If I want to like move tabs on top of each other, some of these applications on top of each other, you know, I could certainly do that. And then I can just flip through at the top of the screen. You know, I want to just flip over and look at my transaction view, my period summary, or my inventory detail. So very, very flexible user interface. That's really kind of a high-level overview of the Anytime supply chain. Let's switch back over and we'll kind of conclude here because I think I'm running out of time. Before we go into some of the other stuff that we do, the big questions we always have asked are, you know, what's the price? And the price is based on a subscription model. It's an annual purchase commitment, and we're looking at $400 per month. And then a small fee. I have to look at the pricing. I think it's like $50 per user per month for additional planners. The other side of it is down the road, later this year, we do have plans to also extend the application so that if your accounting or ERP system, such as an Intact or a QuickBooks, for example, does not have a bill of material or does not have work orders or production entry capabilities, you'll be able to pull out inventory order information from QuickBooks or Intact, feed it through Anytime supply chain, and actually get planned work orders or planned production orders, which would be kind of an after-the-fact thing. So look for that if you're on either of those applications, QuickBooks, Peachtree, Intact, or some of the other, you know, mainstream accounting applications that are a little weaker in the manufacturing area. Okay. From an integration standpoint, we are looking to support multiple accounting and ERP systems. Out of the gate, it's going to be Sage 100, which is a former Mass 90 200 products, Sage 500, Sage 300 is probably a month out from the release, and then we're also looking at Intact, obviously, as well as QuickBooks. Peachtree is probably in the next 60, 90 days as well. So if you are on either of those platforms, contact us. We'll get you some more information. Some of the other things we do, we have a cloud-based accounts receivable credit and collections management application called Anytime Collect. We just did a webinar on that. If you're having any issues or you think you may have some issues with collections, then you have to seriously look at this application. We have a customer that last year collected more than they invoiced, believe it or not, because they were able to go and be more effective in collecting stuff that they had previously been unable to collect just by using the application. Anytime Commerce is a business-to-business e-commerce storefront. Very, very affordable, integrated to all the ERP applications that we've talked about today. Anytime Supply Chain, we just covered. Anytime Assets is an online asset management system, and more. We do also work with a number of different ERP and accounting systems, Epicor, Intact, Sage 500, as well as Sugar CRM. So if you have any interest in those, let us know. And with that, we're going to actually wrap up and conclude the webinar. If you have questions, please go ahead and ask them in the question panel within the GoToWebinar. If you've slid the tab over, you're going to have to expand that. While we wait for questions, I just want to point out that I do have my contact information on the screen. If you have any questions whatsoever, if you're a customer running any of those different accounting applications and you're interested in Anytime Supply Chain, contact us and we can set up a personalized demonstration, talk about your requirements in a little more detail. If you're a reseller of any of those applications on the call today, we do sell through resellers, and we would love to be able to work with you to get this solution to market, and we can do custom webinars for your customers just to let them know what's available, for them to be more effective in their supply chain management. At this point, I'm actually not seeing any questions. So we're going to conclude the webinar. Again, jot down my contact information. We did record the webinar today, and we will make a link available if you would like to share this with a colleague or a customer. So with that, we're going to let you go, and I'd like to thank you again for taking time out for the presentation. We'll talk to you all soon. Take care. Bye.